Morning, Fairfax community. Another extraordinary person today. Very interesting. We've only got a certain amount of time, so we'll cover what we can, but we could end up in Nepal. We could end up on the Great Ocean Road. We could end up anywhere. I'm not going to do much of an introduction because this person is going to talk about themselves, and he is an extraordinary person, has had an extraordinary path, and he's going to be a really interesting watch and listen. Jem Fuller, thanks for joining the Fairfax this morning.
Ross, it's good to be here, mate. We've done a little bit of dancing to get here, and yeah, I've been looking forward to having a chat with you.
Jem, we're going to jump around a bit just so we can give the audience a bit of an idea. What would you, if you had to, what would you give yourself as a job title?
Look, it depends who I'm talking to. If it's someone who just you bump into in an elevator and they ask you what you do, I just say leadership coach.
Yeah.
If they're not interested, it just kind of stays there and we start talking about something else more interesting. But if I'm chatting with someone who is interested or someone who cares, there's many ways that we can approach what I do. Why I do what I do is actually more important to me than the what. And I'm pretty passionate about us humans being able to employ some practices, some habitual ways of being each day, which makes our life easier. Just makes things easier. And that's not to say that there aren't going to be times that are challenging. It's not to say that there isn't going to be pain. When someone dies, it hurts and grief hurts. And all sorts of pain that comes through this experience of being human. However, it can be easier, and so through living these practices and going through the trials and tribulations of life, as we all do, and learning and creating some of these ways, perspectives and meditations and affirmations and daily practices that make life easier, I'm on a mission to share them, with anyone that's interested.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Lower Templestowe in Melbourne.
Pretty normal sort of childhood?
Yeah. Like as normal as it can be. I was born in Haarlem, near Amsterdam in Holland. My father was from Leeds in the Yorkshire district of England. So the first year of my life was in England, actually. Mum is 6th or 7th generation Gippsland sale out in Gippsland.
Okay. Yep.
And so Mum and Dad met when he was working on the oil rigs in the Bass Strait and based out of Sale. So Mum and Dad met there, and then they went off traveling around the world. His work had them all around the world. And I was going to be born somewhere in the Middle East, and then they got posted to Holland a couple of weeks before I was born. But yeah, then grew up from the age of 1, grew up in Lower Templestowe, went to Tempe Heights Primary School, went to Xavier College, although I'm not your general kind of Xavier College mold.
Not part of the Catholic mafia.
Not part of the Catholic mafia. And as soon as I finished, I was 18 when I finished high school, and I did finish, although that last year was pretty rough because my best mate died just before my 18th birthday.
What happened there?
Motorcycle accident.
Right.
I've lost my best mate and my brother to motorcycle accidents.
So the first one, you're 18. That's it's pretty young. You're still forming. How did that affect you?
It was traumatic. Yeah, 5 days before my 18th birthday, he rode his motorbike into the back of a parked truck. He was riding it illegally. He didn't have his license. I think he was only 17. And then so my 18th birthday was sitting bedside in the hospital in Melbourne while he was in a coma, hooked up to all the machines. And then 5 days after my 18th birthday, they decided to switch the machines off and let him die. So yeah, it was traumatic, man. And so for the second half of year 12, thankfully up until that point, it was halfway through year 12, up until that point, I'd worked reasonably hard. I was trying my best to do well in year 12. From that point on, I stopped working, started drinking beer and smoking bongs. And I somehow managed to pass year 12 just based off the first 6 months of work.
And where did life take you when you finished at Xavier? Where did you go?
As far as I could get away as possible. As soon as I finished, I got a job in a nightclub. Do you remember Chasers, the nightclub on Chapel Street?
Yes, yes. Chasers, Chevrons,
Yeah.
Silvers, Redheads.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I got a job as a bussy in Chasers. Back in the days when the security, so this was in '89, and the security at each different club were a gang. They were an actual gang of brothers, so to speak, and they'd war with each other, and there was all the drug wars going on, and it was all pretty interesting time to work in the nightclub scene. But I just worked there to get enough money to get a one-way ticket to London, and got myself over to London, and then that was when I was 18, and spent most of my 20s and early 30s somewhere around the world, either earning money to keep traveling or as off the beaten track as possible.
How did those years, how were they formative for you? How did they lead you to where you are now?
Oh, in many ways, lots of contemplation, lots of curiosity around. I've always been really curious about life, and that's been a blessing and a curse. Sometimes too introspective or too philosophical. But through those formative years in my 20s, really trying to figure out who I thought I was and how I fit, as we all do.
Yeah.
But I identified as anti-establishment.
Yeah.
Earlier days, I wanted to be a punk. I was piercing my lips and wearing mohawks and dreadlocks and covering myself in tattoos and living in squats in London. I just wanted to be as far away from the general rat race as possible. And I used to kind of look upon what now I see is just normal life, but I used to look upon it with a kind of disdain. I was like, I do not want to be like everyone else. And that was a reaction to my father. Bless his cotton socks. He was super conservative. He was an engineer and he was on the church council, and he was a good man. Very conservative. But I didn't want to be him. I just was a reaction against him, which I think a lot of father-son relationships are kind of like that.
Did he, I'm sure as well-meaning as he was, did he want for you what he had? Do you think that was a fair?
He wanted me to, my childhood memories are, he wanted me to toughen up, suck it up, toughen up, harden up. He was post-war Leeds.
Right.
And you stiff upper lip, don't show any emotions. And he ruled, he parented, he ruled. It was like he was ruling the family, but he parented out of fear.
Yeah.
Using fear as his way to keep us in line. So I grew up scared of my dad. Yeah.
Did you have that nice sensation? I know my wife traveled a lot when you leave high school, because when you're at high school, it's pretty easy to think that that's your whole life. And then you leave and you go, that is such a tiny portion.
Yeah.
And it's actually, as much as school can be fun, so liberating when you leave.
Yeah. Amazing. Really amazing. And I was through my 20s and early 30s, and even still now when Talia and I go to different countries, I was fascinated with getting to places that were really, really different to Lower Templestowe and Kew, Melbourne.
Yeah.
I didn't want to go to the States. I mean, I've been to the States plenty of times, but I wasn't really fascinated about the States. I was fascinated about Afghanistan or Pakistan or Tibet or, you know, Thailand or anywhere really, Laos, somewhere really different,
Excuse me. Places where you could be a little bit scared and maybe have explosive diarrhea from the diets.
I've had plenty of that. Yeah, I've had plenty of that. Places where their norm didn't make sense. Places where their culture, what was sensical to them was illogical to me. They were the places I was curious about. And also, those places just so happened to be really cheap to live in. I could live on next to nothing. But when I really got down into the depth of this travel, and this was mainly on the Indian subcontinent for a few years, I was barefoot, dreadlocked, and disappearing out into the backwaters of India. And I found a way to actually blend in over there.
Happy?
Was I happy? Yes, I was, but I was also at that time I was healing from a broken heart, my first proper broken heart from my teenage sweetheart. We broke up when we were living in London, and so I was healing a broken heart, but I was also finding myself. That was the first time I had what people call an identity crisis, and I was in my late 20s. I had no idea who I was. Because we identify with our vehicles, right? We identify with our relationships and our career and the things we do. So
The
we say,
external?
we say I'm so-and-so's husband or wife or whatever. Or we say I'm a coach, or I'm a basketball player, or I'm a pianist, or whatever it is, right? We identify with these things that are temporary. And so when they're gone, we can have an identity crisis to some degree. Which I've been lucky enough to have a couple of times in my life now, because they're really an identity opportunity when you kind of find yourself free from the shackles of identifying with vehicles. You have an opportunity then to really have a think about, well, actually, who do I want to be? How do I want to identify? And for me, the second time around in my early 40s, when I had the stereotypical midlife crisis, and I lost my corporate job, and my marriage had to finish up, and we had to sell the family home that we'd built. I lost everything basically, except for my two boys, my two sons, in my early 40s. But that was an opportunity to go, hang on a second. So if I'm not her husband, and if I'm not, that corporate role, and if I'm not those things, who can I choose to be, and really start to identify with my values? So rather than being those things, that we can start to identify and go, do you know what? I'm a kind, generous, caring, passionate, action-taking man. That's who I am, and none of that can be ever taken away from me. So,
Can you tell me about this amazing journey that you take people on in Nepal?
yeah, sure.
And did
yeah.
that line up with after losing your corporate job and the marriage dissolving? Was it about that time?
Yeah. It's in northwest India.
Right.
Actually, where we go. But it's funny because whenever you say the word Himalaya, people think Nepal.
Yeah.
Straight away, because they run.
Ignorant people like I do, who have mainly traveled to Noosa and Byron Bay and take conservative trips. Yeah. My wife would be rolling her eyes right now. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So in the top northwest end of the Himalaya, up in northwestern India, and it's kind of nestled in between Tibet and Pakistan, where we go. And there is a nice little story behind that. When I was in my 20s, I stumbled across this family that live in a temple above a village in the foothills of the Himalayan mountains. Very, very remote, stunning part of the world. And I ended up living with this family, and they ended up becoming my second family. They kind of adopted me over the years, and I've lived with them a lot, and we've grown up together, so to speak. Their son, who actually shares the same birthday as me, he's a bit younger than me, but we share the same birthday. He and I bonded and became brothers before we were married or had children or whatever. So we've watched each other's kids grow up over the years.
Yeah.
But when I was first there, I had this feeling that I was going to take people there. I just had this feeling. I was like, I'm going to bring people here. It's going to be some sort of retreat or something. And back, this was when I was in my 20s, and I was like, I don't know what it's about, but I think it's about getting people away from their suit and tie life, getting people away from, really a long way away from the machines and the computers and the cars and the buildings and the Western thing. And I said this to my brother over there, Papu, and he's a conservationist and also a trekking guide. He's actually become really good friends with a mutual friend of ours, Sam Lane.
Sam, yes,
Yep.
Good man.
Yeah, good man. So Sam's come on this program twice with me now. He loves it over there, and he's been welcomed into the family that I'm talking about. And Papu said to me, all right, well, he's a trekking guide. He said, well, you bring people over here. Let's take them trekking, and we'll pick up rubbish in the mountains. That was the initial idea. And that was, all those years ago. And then after my midlife opportunity, and I was studying coaching, I went and studied coaching and human behavioral profiling and all the stuff I do now. And I was in the room, and I had a light bulb moment. And I just downloaded the whole thing in minutes. I just went, it's called Leaders in Life. It's a leadership program. I'm going to take business owners and leaders over to Papu's place, and I'm going to teach them cool stuff, and then we're going to go remote trekking in the mountains. And I had this idea, and that was how many years ago was that now? That was 10 years ago. I had the idea and just started doing it. So,
and what were you teaching them over there? What sort of stuff?
So we have 4 conversations, and those conversations, the themes of those conversations are a reconnection and a redesign of sense of self. So how do you identify and how do you relate to yourself? A reconnection to being part of the greater system. So the fact that we are intrinsically and inseparably a part of the bigger system, and how do we access flow more easily? How do we, get on the right path, the path that, where we do our best work, or, where we feel the most satisfied in our life. A reconnection to others. So understanding human behavior, understanding how other people operate, and a reconnection to purpose. So designing what is my mission, so to speak. Why do I
stripping people back to the core?
Yeah, in quite a non-confrontational way. I mean, it's real. We go there. It's real, but it's very held.
Okay.
But then when we track, so we have these conversations in a yoga room, in a temple on the side of a mountain surrounded by the Himalayas, and then we go trekking. And the trekking is really, that's when the content and the content's deep, and the models that I share are applicable. So you can take the models and just apply them into your life straight away. And then when we trek for 7 days, people really have the opportunity for all of that information to marinate and percolate a little bit, and everyone gets, I call them a little thought harvesting book. Everyone gets a little notebook and they carry it with them while we're trekking. And I love it. You just watch people have these light bulb moments while they're walking. And they're like, oh shit, right, that. And they pull out their little book and harvest their thoughts. One of the days when we're trekking, and it doesn't give too much away by sharing this, it's still profound when people do it, but it's on about day 5 of the trek. So people have settled in, everyone knows each other quite well now, and we're deep in the mountains. Where we go trekking, there's no other people. We're not on a trekking path like in Nepal where there's a stream of backpackers. Where we go, we take pack horses to carry our gear. We've got some guides, and we go off the beaten track. There's no one where we go. And so on.
No phone reception?
No phone reception.
So you really are, sorry to interrupt, but you really are just with your basic thoughts, aren't you? There's nothing there to distract you.
Nothing. Yeah, off the grid. It's really, really nice. So day 5, at the start of the day, I just say 2 things to everyone. Today we walk in silence, right? So no talking at all today. And everyone's like, oh, geez, that's a bit full on. And then I say to them, and we walk slowly. And Ross, we walk really slowly, really. Like if you were in a helicopter flying over the top of us, you'd think we weren't moving. That's how slowly we walk. And to begin with, I'm kind of watching everyone freaking out inside their heads going, I can't do this all day. This is going to kill me. And one by one, they pop into this meditative state, blissful state. It's really quite profound. And then at the end of the day, when we start collecting firewood to make the fire around the campsite again, and I introduce language back into the group, every single person comes up to me in their own way and just says, Jem, that was the most profound day of my life, mate. I've seen the whole thing from a different perspective now. I've seen the whole thing clearly. So yeah, it's pretty special work.
So we're a pretty complex society, aren't we? Part of this matrix, and we have distractions 24 hours a day, don't we? If we don't want to face in and look inwards, something like that really does bring you back to the core, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It's not for everyone, that Himalaya trip. It's pretty rough and ready.
Yeah.
But if you've got an adventurous spirit, and you're looking for something that is certainly life-defining, doesn't necessarily need to be life-changing. Don't come home and quit your job and leave your marriage. Certainly not within the first 6 months after the experience,
Yeah.
Let things just chill. But it's life defining, the experience. Yeah. We run a similar program in terms of the content in Bali, but this one is 5-star private villas, spa treatments, cocktails at the end of the night. It's so the context is completely different, but the content's the same.
How many people have you had through this program?
The Himalaya one?
Yeah, well, Himalayas and Bali.
Yeah, so Himalaya must be getting close to 100 people now.
Yeah.
So not thousands. It's small and boutique. I've never taken more than 10 people in one trip, and I don't want to.
Yeah.
I mean, even if a corporate came to me and said, "Can you take 30 of our leaders?" I would say no. And also purely logistically, that's just not possible. Some of the places where we're camping on the side of these mountains, there's only enough space really just to get half a dozen tents. So yeah, no, look, I'm happy with it being remaining small. And also I'm taking people into my family's home over there. And I've said no to some people who've applied to come on the program, and I've interviewed them and didn't feel like they were appropriate to take into this little family, and we're going to a temple. And this Krishna temple, I mean, I'm not religious myself, but my family are. This Krishna temple is thousands of years old. Thousands, and it's a sacred site. We have to go in there respectfully,
What are some of the changes you've seen in people when they've come back in their approach to life?
Wow. Where to start? Just then, when you asked me that question, I was getting flashes of all the different people that have come with me. There was one guy who came with us, and he and his wife had been struggling to get pregnant. And this is a bit of a woo-woo story. He and his wife had been struggling to get pregnant, and they'd been trying everything. And then Papu found out about this. And this temple is the folklore over there in the village is that this temple is a really good place for fertility and for people who are struggling to have babies, and they go up there. And Papu and his father, they're the priests, the Krishna priests. They do a special blessing, a Krishna blessing, and they reckon they've got 100% strike rate, and everyone has a baby after that, right? And I was like, well, I don't know if this is going to work. But they got my client, and they sat him down and they dressed him up and they put a special hat on him and some special scarves around him. And they did this hour-and-a-half ceremony. And yep, he went back to Australia, and he and his wife found a way to get pregnant. They've got a kid.
Wow.
Yeah, incredible, huh?
I want to talk about the topic of death with you. And you've already described how you lost your best friend in year 12. Your father passed?
Yeah, Dad died of a brain tumor when he was 67.
Yeah.
And then 4 months after that, which was quite tragic actually, because my youngest brother had moved home from Canada specifically so that we could nurse Dad through palliative care at home, which we did. And that death was actually pretty beautiful. But my brother had moved home to look after Mum, and 4 months after my dad died, my brother died on his motorbike, had a head on. That
was in the Grampians?
Yeah, just outside the Grampians, yeah. When he was 30 years old.
So with your dad, it was prepared and structured, and there was time to say goodbye?
Yes, it was. And one of my mates is a very senior nurse, and he came to the house and showed us how to care for Dad right through to the end. He showed us how to, clean him and roll him in the bed, and how to help his transition be as easy as possible. We were administering, the drugs, and we were bedside. The family was bedside with him all the way through as he was slipping into unconsciousness. Yeah. And we're a musical family, so there was always someone singing for him. We'd be sitting in the room just singing. And just before he took his last breath, I'm from a family of six of us. Just before he took his last breath, all of us just came into the room. We just knew, and the five of us were around the bedside. And he had his eyes closed for 3 days, and he opened his eyes and he looked directly at Mum, and took his last breath and then went. And it was actually quite remarkable. Really, really stunning. And then within 2 minutes, one of my boys was young. I think he was like three or something. And within 2 minutes, he was sitting on the bedside and he had his hand on my dad's shoulder, and my dad had just passed, and the room was silent apart from the tears. And then the 3-year-old starts, Billie Jean's not my lover. And we all just pissed ourselves laughing. It was hysterical. And it just broke that ice. And then we're all laughing and crying. So it was a beautiful passing. But then 4 months later, when we found out that my other brother had died, that was the opposite. It was completely horrific. And, I wouldn't wish that on anyone.
So, sorry, can you take me through the day of your brother's passing and how you found out and what happened?
Yeah, sure. I was living in Port Wollonga in South Australia, my then wife and I and our little kids. And she had actually come over to Melbourne to have a holiday. And I'd taken some time off work to be with the boys, who were 3 and 6 or 3 and 5 or something like that. And I'd put the kids to bed, and I'd just climbed into bed, and it was about 9:30, and the phone rang, and I ignored it. I saw that it was Mum, and I ignored it because I thought I'm just going off to sleep. And then it rang again, and I was like, oh, something must be up. And I picked up the phone, and Mum just said the 2 words. She just said, Tim's dead. And my whole world stopped.
So in that moment, I'm sorry, but what do you feel emotionally and physically when you get told that?
Pure shock and denial, not denial, pure shock. That feeling of shock, and then it doesn't feel real, but you're like, oh shit, this is real, but you're not wanting it to be real. And then there's the no. And then I had to go from being the receiver of that news to the giver of that news. And I had to call my wife and tell her. And then I called my parents-in-law, and they came over, and I booked some flights. The next flight I could get on first thing in the morning. And they stayed with the boys, with my sons, who were very close with their uncle, loved their uncle. And then flew over, and it was just horrible. It was really shocking and nothing nice about it at all. Although, looking back now, I grew up in a home with an open door policy. We always had people in our house, international guests and people just dropping in, and it was just an open door house. And it was the same in grief. So even in loss, open door, and people, our community came from far and wide, all around the world. My brother was quite a global young man and very, very loved by a lot of people. And so we had community in our house, cooking and cleaning for us and holding us as we wailed together and wept and put together the celebration of his life. And, all of that kind of stuff was done in community, which I think was really beautiful. And
how many years ago was that?
13.
Okay.
13 years ago. And I think that people who grieve in solitude, and I don't want to judge anyone, but I think that if someone is pushing the grief aside and not allowing death to be a part of life, I don't think that's very healthy. I know some people who tried to protect their children from the fact that a family member had died, and they wouldn't let them see them, or they wouldn't let them go to the funeral, or they wouldn't let them see the body, or all of this stuff. And I don't think that's healthy. When my brother died, we all went in to view the body. We with the cremation, my sons saw us push the casket into the incinerator. They got to actually, it's a part of life. Death is a part of life. And as painful as it is, I think that we need to also honor it. I don't know if I told you how I met Mr. Sam Lane.
That's you did, and the audience would love to know this part.
Yeah. This is, I think, certainly one of my most respected, honored, special, cherished assignments as a coach, was as a death doula. And I didn't know this term at the time, but my sister's since told me that there are such things as death doulas. So a doula in birth is, the assistant through the birth process for everyone. But Sam's auntie engaged me down the coast here. I live down the coast. We were in Aries Inlet at the time, and she engaged me to coach her son through the last year of his life. He had a terminal illness and he was dying. And she asked me to coach him through that last year of his life. And it was really quite remarkable. And to coach him and his family around how that could be, how that last year could be. And it ended up being really beautiful. And that was, I just remember feeling so honored that I'd been asked to be in that role with that family. And it's something that I think I might possibly do more of in my later years, because it is really important. We're all going to die 100%, and we don't know when, but we avoid it. We avoid this conversation around death. And I think that's a shame. I think we should be able to talk about it like you and I are now.
Why do we avoid it, do you think?
Oh, it just scares the shit out of us.
Yeah.
And us humans, we like to think that we live on forever. There's a lot of self-importance that goes on with being human. We think we're more important than we actually are.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we are important, and in terms of living well and loving others and making some sort of positive difference. That I'm not discounting any of that, but it's good to remember that in the grand scheme of things, we don't matter at all.
We don't, do we? To
No.
quote the great Joe Dispenza.
Yeah.
So
we take ourselves way too seriously.
Anything confidential when you assisted Sam's cousin? What form did that take? What sort of things were you doing with the family to get them prepared?
Most of it was sitting with him and having conversations with him, about his fears, about his, the way he wanted to be, the way he wanted to live those last months of his life, how he wanted that to be, and his family as well, but most of it was sitting with him.
What, in your experience and having dealt a lot with death, what do people fear when they know they're going to die? What are the things? What are the regrets? What are the fears people have?
People don't want their family to hurt. They don't want their family to hurt. Some people are fearful of what's quote unquote on the other side.
Scared,
just scared because we don't know. We just don't know. But when people come to a peace, however they come to their own peace around their own death, it's really just that they don't wish grief upon those that are left.
Is it quite a profound thing to see someone reach that point of acceptance?
Yeah, it's beautiful. And we don't need to wait till we're dying to do that.
Yeah.
We can come to that acceptance now, through practice. And there's a liberation in that, because death can really inform the way we choose to live.
Yeah.
And
so it's almost like seeing the end of the book and working backwards and going, well, this is what I'm going to do with the time that I have.
Yeah, I think so. Hey, how's this, Ross? I love this. Can I ask you some questions, right?
Sure.
To give you this example. So do you know the names of your 4 grandparents?
Yes.
Do you know the 8 names of your great-grandparents?
No.
So your great-grandkids won't even know who you were.
Wow.
They won't even know your name. Right.
Wow.
And we talk about legacy, and we talk about, our name living on, or at least we hope that it would, but it doesn't.
No.
I don't even know the name of the guy who invented penicillin. Not many people do, but he invented penicillin, right? That's the legacy. not the personal ego part. So the difference that we can make in people's lives while we're here, while we're around, and whatever legacy, i.e. what continues on after we're gone, it's not the ego thing. It's not the personal thing. It's not that my name will be remembered. It's the positive impact I can have on my children and perhaps a little bit on my grandchildren and the people around me, the community around me, and hopefully how that helps them then, ripple effect.
Our ego is a very dangerous thing, isn't it? It's there to protect us, but my goodness, it gives us a false sense of self
Yeah.
and can alienate us from people. And as you say, give us a real false sense of who we are when, look, I've been through a bit of a journey over the last few years, and my identity was with my job, and then things didn't go right, and it backfires if your identity is not positive. It's frightening, but refreshing.
Yeah. Yeah. The ego is so, and yes, it's there to protect us. The ego is so determined to lock onto and grip tightly onto however it has identified. Even if that sense of identity causes suffering, the ego still doesn't want it to change. And even if that means that I will lose loved ones over a disagreement around an identification, that's what the ego will do. I mean, I watched people through COVID, I watched families fall apart because the ego had identified with an idea like I'm pro-vax or I'm anti-vax. And because the ego had identified with that idea, the families fell apart over it, or pro-life, pro-choice, or blue or red or black or white, or, these differences of ideas. And it's crazy to watch the ego will destroy anything that threatens those ideas. Even so, if you've got someone who's identified as a depression sufferer, or a drug addict or a alcoholic or whatever, it's not just the physical addiction to that, it's the psychological addiction to that identification, which makes it really hard for them to move on and expand into their potential and become the next version of themselves, because the ego fears the change.
I hate to ask this question because it brushes across the top and it simplifies things, which it shouldn't. What message could you give, or what a couple of messages could you give to people about modern day society and how people can bring themselves back to who they truly are and how they can find just happiness in amongst themselves?
If you can dedicate some time in your daily practice, whatever your daily routine is, if you can dedicate some time to some mindfulness meditation, just create a little bit of space, even if it's just 5 minutes a day, because when we sit and practice mindfulness, which is simply an observation of the present moment, rather than being identified with the emotion we're feeling or the thoughts we're having or the thing we're doing, rather than being identified and enmeshed in it, it's the practice of going to a place of just simply observing it. And what that creates is space to remember that you are not your thoughts. You're not your emotions. That's not who you are in terms of a sense of identity. So it gives us the ability to free ourselves from this kind of perpetual internal rat race that we're caught up in. Our ego exists in our thinking, right? So we're caught up in this thing and just constantly reacting to everything all throughout the day. So if you can create a practice of even just 5 minutes, I mean, for me, it's 20 minutes or half an hour, but even just 5 minutes to pause from that. It's a really good perspective to remember.
We spend a lot of time looking past and looking forward, don't we, as opposed to just sitting in the now.
Yeah, completely. And people who say to me, Jem, I don't have time to meditate, which is not true, but if people are really stuck in that thinking that I don't have time to meditate, then integrate a mindfulness practice.
Well, we've got time for 2 hours of Netflix a day and to do everything else. We do have time.
Yeah. But even just integrate it into something you're already doing. I mean, we all brush our teeth. right? Just when you're brushing your teeth, create a practice of mindfully brushing your teeth, which means just noticing the present moment. And you'll realize, oh shit, when I brush my teeth, I'm thinking about what I didn't get done that day, or I'm thinking, the kids are being noisy and they should be in bed by now, or I'm thinking, oh, tomorrow I've got to do that thing, or I'm brushing my teeth madly and my mind is racing a million miles an hour about, like you said, the past or the future, or outside of this room that I'm in.
Mm.
Wow, how about if I just spent 5 minutes brushing my teeth and just noticing the feeling of the bristles on my teeth and my gums, noticing the toothpaste, noticing the sound, just noticing this present moment. It's really healthy for us to do that,
Yeah. Well, look, speaking as someone who has spent a lot of his life going, if only this, if only that, if only I do this, if only I do that, then everything will be okay. It's not going to be, is it? You just I'm right here.
Yeah.
This is where I am right now.
Yeah. And, there's very, very rarely is the present moment actually suffering. I mean, if you've just, I don't know, had a physical injury and you've just sliced your arm open or something and it's painful, then okay, sure, you're going to sit there and you're going to feel pain. But a physical injury aside, just in this present moment, all of our suffering is in our thinking, and our thinking's usually in the past or the future. That's where we do our suffering. And so
A
when
psychologist once said to me, you can't walk forward if you're looking back, you're going to trip over.
Yeah. Well, you know what you do when you're holding on to stuff from the past, you very literally project that into your future. Because so we're sitting here in this given moment, and there's all this stimuli around us, right? So there's information from the environment around us, and we receive this information through our senses in bits of information. So what we can see and hear and touch, taste, smell, right? So we receive all of this information, and then we project this information inside our minds to have some sense of what we call reality, right? But to do that, we filter the information through a series, a network of beliefs, predispositions, what we think things should be, and that's how we piece this information together. Now, if your beliefs are still caught up on your past traumas, you just keep replaying that same thing and receiving information and distorting that information to match your beliefs, right? So you very literally start moving into the future and you're distorting the information that's available to match your past stuff. So we keep doing this broken record thing.
Yeah, you can stop describing me now. Thank you, Jem.
Yeah.
Jem, a little bit of a plug now. Can you please give your website and your Instagram site? I'll put it on my socials, but can you tell everyone where they can get in contact with you, whether they want to apply for your trek, apply for Bali, leadership coaching, death doula? Can you please give us your details?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And also, I'd love it if you felt like reading my book. I wrote a book a year ago called The Art of Conscious Communication for Thoughtful Men. I did write it for men, but it's normally women that are buying it and reaching out to me and saying, thanks for writing that book. That's awesome. I've got to try and get my hubby to read it now.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can grab that book. But everywhere Ross is Jem Fuller, JEM FULLER. So the website's jemfuller.com. Instagram is Jem Fuller.
Jem, I'd like to go and get a cup of tea and talk to you for another 3 hours. I know that you have to do your amazing work with lots of people. You are an extraordinary person. You've had an extraordinary journey, a genuine extraordinary journey, and it continues. And on behalf of the Bare Facts team and the community, I'd really like to thank you for sharing some of your wisdom with us today.
Mate, that's really lovely. And I want to thank you for having me on your show. It's been a real pleasure.
Jem will be available on all the major podcast sites. He will also, this interview, this visual interview will also be available on my YouTube channel. Thank you. I can't really say anything else, but thank you, Jem. Really appreciate it, and really hope that people get onto your site and all your connections and really try and look into these amazing theories and thoughts and practices that you're helping people with.
Awesome. Thanks, mate.